Welcome to Snooze Stories. Tonight, we journey back to a world on the cusp of transformation, to the 4th century before the Common Era, when the old order of Greek city-states was crumbling and something new, something unprecedented, was about to emerge from the north. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back through time, back past the rise and fall of Rome, past the Hellenistic kingdoms, to a moment when the map of the known world was about to be redrawn by a single extraordinary life, to a time when the Persian Empire, ancient, vast, seemingly eternal, dominated the East, while Greece remained fractured into jealous, competing cities, when Egypt still worshipped pharaohs as gods, when India was a land of mystery and legend, when the very edges of the world were unknown, unexplored, waiting. We are going to Macedonia in the mid-4th century BCE. Not the sophisticated Athens of philosophers and playwrights, not the austere Sparta of warriors, but the kingdom to the north that proper Greeks regard with suspicion, too rustic, too monarchical, too close to the barbarian world to be truly civilized. Yet from this kingdom will emerge a king who will change everything, who will march an army across the known world and beyond, who will die at 32 having conquered more territory than anyone in human history before him. His name is Alexander. Perhaps you already know the outline of his story. The student of Aristotle who became the conqueror of Persia, the young king who led his army from Greece to India, founding cities wherever he went, spreading Greek culture across 3 continents, the military genius who never lost a battle, the man who declared himself a god and perhaps believed it, the legend who has inspired and haunted humanity for more than 2,000 years. But tonight, we're going to discover the human being behind the legend. The boy born into a dysfunctional royal family, caught between a brilliant, ruthless father and an intense, mystical mother. The teenager who tamed an untamable horse and commanded cavalry at 18. The young king who inherited a kingdom and a dream and transformed both into an empire. The friend who loved deeply and lost tragically. The conqueror who wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. The man who pushed himself and his army past all reasonable limits, driven by an ambition that could never be satisfied. This is a story about extraordinary achievement and terrible cost, about military genius and human frailty, about the intoxication of power and the loneliness of command, about how one person's will, combined with extraordinary circumstances and abilities, can reshape the world, and about how even the mightiest conqueror remains mortal. If you enjoy these historical stories, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support means everything. And if you have suggestions for other historical figures, leave a comment below. So, settle in. Let the day's tensions fall away. We have an epic journey ahead of us, from the palace at Pella to the deserts of Egypt, from the mountains of Asia to the rivers of India. We will witness battles that decided the fate of empires, sieges that seemed impossible, marches that tested human endurance to its limits. We will see cities founded and cities destroyed, kings humbled and soldiers elevated, cultures blended and traditions shattered. But most of all, we will follow one life, blazing bright, burning fast, extinguishing young. A life that compressed in 32 years more action, more drama, more consequence than most civilizations achieve in centuries. This is the story of Alexander, not as a marble statue or a name in a history book, but as a living, breathing human being who dreamed impossible dreams and made them real, who reached for godhood and grasped mortality, who conquered the world and lost himself. Let us begin at the beginning, in the palace at Pella on a summer night in 356 BCE, when a child is born who will shake the foundations of the earth.
The night is alive with omens, or so the stories will later claim, as Olympias labors to bring her child into the world, News arrives at the palace that Philip's general Parmenion has won a great victory over the Illyrians. On the same night, Philip's horse wins at the Olympic Games, an honor that brings glory to the king and the kingdom. And on that same night, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the world, burns to the ground. The Magi of Persia will later say that the goddess was too busy attending Alexander's birth to protect her own temple. These are omens assembled after the fact, stories shaped by the knowledge of what this child will become. But on that summer night in 356 BCE in the royal palace at Pella, he is simply a baby, squalling, red-faced, helpless like any other newborn. They name him Alexandros, Alexander, meaning defender of men or protector of men, another name heavy with expectation, though no one yet knows how literally he will fulfill it, how many men he will lead, how many he will save, how many he will send to their deaths. His father is Philip II, 30 years old, king of Macedon for just 3 years, but already transforming his kingdom from a backward, constantly threatened state into a rising military power. Philip is a complicated man, brilliant strategist, cunning diplomat, fearless warrior, heavy drinker, passionate lover of women and boys alike. He has already lost his right eye to an arrow at the siege of Methone, giving his face a fierce, asymmetrical appearance. He has reformed Macedonia's army, creating the famous phalanx with its long ceresis. He has begun the systematic conquest of neighboring territories and the careful diplomatic manipulation that will eventually make him master of Greece. Philip is Macedonian to his core, a warrior king in a culture that values martial prowess above all. But he also admires Greek civilization, has brought Greek artists and intellectuals to his court, wants to transform Macedonia from a barbarian kingdom into the leader of the Greek world. He has vision, ambition, and the will to make both real. His mother is Olympias, princess of Epirus, descended, if the genealogies are to be believed, from Achilles himself through her ancestor Neoptolemus. She is perhaps 18 when Alexander is born, young and beautiful and intense. Olympias is devoted to mystery religions, to the worship of Dionysus in its most ecstatic forms. She keeps sacred serpents, practices secret rites, claims visions and divine communications. She believes fiercely in her son's special destiny, tells him he is descended from heroes and gods, that greatness is his birthright.
The marriage between Philip and Olympias is political, an alliance between Macedonia and Epirus, but it is also passionate, volatile, ultimately toxic. Philip takes other wives in the Macedonian tradition of polygamy, which Olympias resents bitterly. She is possessive, jealous, fierce in defense of her son's position as heir. The court at Pella becomes a nest of intrigue, with different wives and their children competing for Philip's favor and for the succession. Young Alexander grows up in this atmosphere of ambition, competition, and barely contained violence. The palace at Pella is grand by Macedonian standards, painted walls, mosaic floors, courtyards where nobles gather, but it is not the refined elegance of Athens. This is a warrior court where men drink heavily, where hunting parties pursue boar and lion in the mountains, where boys train for war from the moment they can hold a weapon, where political disagreements can end in assassination. From his earliest years, Alexander shows signs of being exceptional. He is physically small, compact rather than tall, but extraordinarily energetic, driven, competitive. He has his mother's intensity, his father's ambition, and something else, a charisma, a magnetism that draws people to him, makes them want to follow him, believe in him. He is also sensitive in ways unusual for a Macedonian prince. He loves music, poetry, especially Homer. The Iliad becomes his constant companion, the story of Achilles his obsession. He sees himself in Achilles, the hero who chose glory and a short life over safety and obscurity, who achieved immortal fame through extraordinary deeds. His mother encourages this identification, reminds him constantly of their descent from Achilles,
tells him he is destined for greatness. One story from his childhood captures something essential about him. A merchant brings a magnificent horse to Philip's court, a huge black stallion with a white star on his forehead, wild and apparently untamable. The horse rears and bucks, refusing to let anyone mount him. Philip's horsemen try and fail. The king orders the horse taken away. He has no use for an animal that cannot be ridden. But young Alexander, he is perhaps 10 or 11 years old, speaks up. What a horse they're losing because they lack the skill and courage to handle him. Philip, amused and perhaps annoyed by his son's boldness, challenges him. If you think you can do better, go ahead. But if you fail, what will you forfeit for your rashness? I will pay the price of the horse, Alexander declares, a huge sum, far more than a boy's allowance could cover. The court watches skeptically as Alexander approaches the horse, but he has noticed something the others missed. The horse is afraid of its own shadow, shying away whenever it sees that dark shape moving on the ground. Alexander turns the horse toward the sun so it cannot see its shadow, speaks to it gently, strokes its neck. Then, in one fluid motion, he throws off his cloak and leaps onto the horse's back. The horse starts to run, and the courtiers cry out in alarm, but Alexander lets him run, keeping his seat, not trying to fight the animal's energy, but moving with it. Eventually, the horse tires, calms, and Alexander rides him back to the watching crowd. Philip embraces his son with tears in his eyes. "My boy," he says, "you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." The horse is named Bucephalus, ox head, for the shape of the brand on his shoulder. He will carry Alexander across Asia, will be with him for nearly all his conquests, will die at age 30 in India, mourned like a fallen companion. But more than the horse itself, the story reveals Alexander's character, his confidence, his perception, his ability to see what others miss, his courage, his connection with the animal that becomes almost mystical. When Alexander is 13, Philip decides his son needs a proper education, not just the martial training every Macedonian prince receives, but the intellectual formation that befits someone destined to rule. Philip wants Alexander to be Greek in culture as well as Macedonian in blood, to be at home in the world of philosophy and poetry as well as warfare and hunting. So Philip invites Aristotle, recently returned from years abroad, not yet established at the Lyceum, to come to Macedonia and serve as Alexander's tutor. It is an inspired choice. Aristotle is the most brilliant philosopher in the Greek world, trained by Plato himself, but developing his own comprehensive vision of reality. He is also Macedonian by birth, son of Philip's father's physician, someone who understands both Greek intellectual culture and Macedonian court politics. Aristotle accepts. He comes to Mysa, a sanctuary of the nymphs about 20 miles from Pella, where Philip has prepared buildings for the school. And there, for about 3 years, Aristotle teaches Alexander and a small group of other boys, the sons of Macedonian nobles, who will grow up to be Alexander's closest companions and generals. What does Aristotle teach the future conqueror? Homer, certainly, the Iliad especially, that story of heroes and glory that Alexander already loves. Aristotle prepares a special edition for him, which Alexander will carry throughout his campaigns, keeping it in a precious casket. But Aristotle teaches Homer critically, analyzing the characters, discussing leadership and ethics, using the poetry as a springboard for philosophical inquiry. He teaches rhetoric and logic, ethics and politics, natural philosophy and geography. He instills in Alexander a love of learning, a curiosity about the world, a systematic way of thinking about problems. He teaches about different peoples and cultures, preparing Alexander for a world beyond Macedonia's borders. The relationship between teacher and student is complex. Alexander is brilliant but impatient, hungry for glory rather than contemplation. He respects Aristotle's knowledge, but doesn't share his philosophical temperament. Years later, when Alexander is conquering Asia, he will send back specimens for Aristotle's research, will found cities with libraries, will spread Greek culture across the known world, but he will also adopt Persian customs that Aristotle would have considered barbaric, will claim divine honors that would have horrified any Greek philosopher. But during those years at Mysa, a genuine connection forms. Not the relationship Aristotle might have wanted, Alexander will never be a philosopher, but something real nonetheless. Aristotle gives Alexander an intellectual framework for understanding the world, a respect for learning and culture that will shape how he approaches conquest and rule. Among the boys at Mysa, one becomes special to Alexander, Hephaestion, son of a Macedonian noble. He is Alexander's age, tall where Alexander is compact, beautiful in the classical Greek sense. They become inseparable, companions, friends, perhaps lovers in the Greek tradition, where such relationships between young men are accepted and even celebrated. Ancient sources are circumspect about the physical nature of their relationship, but the emotional bond is undeniable. Alexander will later compare their friendship to that of Achilles and Patroclus, the heroic pair from the Iliad whose love transcended life itself. This circle of companions at Mysa, Hephaestion, Ptolemy, who will rule Egypt, Nearchus, who will command fleets, Cassander, who will eventually betray Alexander's memory, others, forms the core of what will become Alexander's command structure. They grow up together, train together, learn together. The bonds formed here will hold through the incredible stresses of the campaigns to come, though some will eventually break.
At 16, Alexander's formal education ends. Philip makes him regent while the king campaigns elsewhere, and Alexander immediately proves himself. A Thracian tribe, the Maecedoni, rebels. Alexander leads an army against them, defeats them in battle, and founds a city on the site of their capital, Alexandropolis, his first city, though many more will bear his name. He is not yet a man by Greek standards, but he has commanded in battle, has tasted victory, has shown he is his father's son. 2 years later, at 18, Alexander receives his baptism in major warfare. Philip is preparing the decisive confrontation with Athens and Thebes, the showdown that will determine whether Macedonia will dominate Greece or whether the southern cities will maintain their independence. The two armies meet at Chaeronea in 338 BCE. Philip commands the right wing. Alexander commands the cavalry on the left. An enormous responsibility for someone so young, but Philip trusts his son's ability and knows the symbolic value of giving the prince a major command. The battle is fierce, close fought. The Athenians and Thebans are fighting for their freedom, for everything they hold dear, but Philip's tactics and the Macedonian phalanx prove superior. The decisive moment comes when Alexander leads a cavalry charge against the sacred band of Thebes, an elite unit of 300 warriors, 150 pairs of male lovers who fight side by side, who have sworn never to flee while their beloved lives. They stand their ground, they fight to the last man. Alexander's cavalry breaks them, crushes them, leaves them dead on the field. It is a terrible, glorious moment. Alexander has proved himself in the greatest test, has been the instrument of his father's victory, but he has also witnessed the cost, has seen brave men die for their convictions, has learned that glory is written in blood. After Chaeronea, Greece submits to Macedonia, not as conquered provinces, Philip is too clever for that, but as allies in a new league, the League of Corinth, with Philip as its hegemon, its military leader. The official purpose of the League is to wage war against Persia, to take revenge for Xerxes' invasion of Greece a century and a half earlier. But everyone knows the real purpose. Philip now controls Greece, and through Greece he will launch the conquest of the Persian Empire. Alexander is 20 now, a proven warrior, the heir to Macedonia's throne and to Philip's grand ambitions.
The relationship between father and son is complex, love and rivalry intertwined, mutual respect shadowed by competition. Philip is proud of Alexander, but also perhaps threatened by him, aware that the son may surpass the father. Alexander admires Philip, but chafes at being second, at having to wait for his chance at glory. And then in 337 BCE, the tensions in the royal family explode. Philip takes a new wife, Cleopatra, niece of one of his generals. Unlike his previous wives, Cleopatra is Macedonian, fully Greek, not from one of the neighboring kingdoms. At the wedding feast, Cleopatra's uncle drunkenly proposes a toast, hoping for a legitimate heir to the throne, implying that Alexander, son of the Epirote Olympias, is somehow less than fully Macedonian. Alexander leaps to his feet, furious. "What am I, then, a bastard?" He hurls his cup at the man. Philip, drunk and angry, draws his sword and lurches toward Alexander. Whether to strike him or simply to restore order is unclear, but Philip is too drunk, trips, and falls to the floor. Alexander looks down at his father, sprawled helpless. "Look," he says contemptuously, "here is the man who prepares to cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another." Then he storms out, taking Olympias with him, going into voluntary exile. The breach is eventually healed. Macedonia needs its heir, and Philip cannot afford the political damage of a permanent rupture. But the reconciliation is incomplete, formal rather than heartfelt. The damage to their relationship is deep, perhaps irreparable. And then, in the summer of 336 BCE, at Aegae, the old Macedonian capital, everything changes in a single violent moment. Philip is celebrating the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra to Olympias's brother, a politically important marriage cementing the alliance with Epirus. It is a grand affair, with envoys from all over Greece, elaborate ceremonies, theatrical performances. In the morning of the wedding, Philip enters the theater in procession, walking between his son, Alexander, and his new son-in-law, surrounded by his bodyguards. A man named Pausanias, one of Philip's own bodyguards, part of his intimate circle, suddenly rushes forward with a knife. Before anyone can react, he stabs Philip in the chest, piercing his heart. The king falls, dead before he hits the ground. Pausanias tries to flee, but is killed immediately by other guards. The motives remain murky. Was it a personal grudge? Pausanias had been sexually assaulted by associates of the new queen Cleopatra and had been denied justice by Philip. Was it a conspiracy involving larger political forces? Did Olympias, bitter with her displacement, manipulate events? Did the Persians, facing invasion, arrange the assassination? Did Alexander himself play any role? We will never know with certainty. What matters is that Philip is dead, struck down at the peak of his power, on the verge of launching the invasion that would have crowned his life's work. And Alexander, just 20 years old, stands beside his father's body, knowing that everything has changed, that the throne is his if he can seize it and hold it against all who would take it from him.
The hours after Philip's assassination are the most dangerous of Alexander's life. He is 20 years old, untested as a ruler, and the throne of Macedonia, despite hereditary succession being traditional, is not automatically his. There are rivals, both within the royal family and among the ambitious nobles who surround it. There are those who supported Philip's new wife Cleopatra and her infant son, who might see Alexander as an obstacle. There are those who remember Alexander's exile after the wedding feast quarrel, who question his loyalty. There are those who simply see opportunity in chaos. Alexander moves with stunning speed and ruthlessness. Within hours of his father's death, he has secured the palace, placed guards loyal to him at key positions, begun consolidating power. The other bodyguards who were with Pausanias when he killed Philip, whether they were complicit or simply near the assassin, are executed immediately. Cleopatra, Philip's last wife, and her infant son are killed, removing any rival claim to the throne.
It is brutal, necessary by the logic of Macedonian succession, and it establishes immediately that Alexander will not hesitate to do whatever is required. The Macedonian army, that instrument Philip forged into the finest military force in the Greek world, must acclaim Alexander as king. This is the real test. If the soldiers refuse, if the generals who served Philip decide this boy is too young, too untested, Alexander's reign will end before it begins. But Alexander has commanded at Chaeronea, has proven himself in battle. More importantly, he has charisma, that indefinable quality that makes men want to follow him. He addresses the assembly of soldiers, and they acclaim him. The generals, Parmenion, Antipater, Attalus, the men who served Philip for decades, accept his leadership. Perhaps they see in him Philip's qualities. Perhaps they see no better alternative. Perhaps they simply recognize that this young man possesses something extraordinary. But Macedonia is only the beginning. Philip's death sends shockwaves through the Greek world, and everywhere leaders begin calculating, testing, probing. To the north, the tribes that Philip had subdued, Illyrians, Thracians, others, sense opportunity. A new young king means weakness, means a chance to throw off Macedonian domination, to raid Macedonian territory, to reclaim independence. And in Greece itself, in the cities that submitted to Philip after Chaeronea, that joined his League of Corinth with such reluctance, hope springs up like fire from embers. In Athens, the great orator Demosthenes, who spent his career warning against Macedonian power, receives the news with barely concealed joy. Philip, the destroyer of Greek freedom, is dead. His son is a boy, untested. Perhaps the nightmare of Macedonian domination is over. Perhaps Athens can be free again. Thebes, still mourning the destruction of the sacred band at Chaeronea, stirs with thoughts of revenge. Other cities watch, wait, wondering if this is the moment to rebel, to reclaim what Philip took from them. Alexander understands that he must act immediately, must demonstrate that Philip's death changes nothing, that Macedonia under Alexander is as formidable as Macedonia under Philip, perhaps more so. He marches south with his army, moving with a speed that catches the Greek cities unprepared. There will be no time for alliances to form, no time for coordinated resistance. He arrives at Thermopylae, that famous pass where the Spartans once held off the Persian invasion, and the Greeks see not a boy king, but an army, disciplined, professional, overwhelming. City after city submits without fighting. Athens sends ambassadors begging forgiveness for Demosthenes' premature celebrations of Philip's death. Alexander, showing political wisdom beyond his years, accepts graciously. He grants Athens favorable terms, confirms their membership in the League of Corinth, asks only for their loyalty. At Corinth, the League meets and proclaims Alexander as hegemon in his father's place, as leader of the planned campaign against Persia. It is a crucial moment. The Greek cities, however reluctantly, are acknowledging Alexander's authority, are committing to follow him east. While in Corinth, Alexander meets the philosopher Diogenes, who lives in a barrel, who has rejected all social conventions and material possessions in pursuit of virtue and self-sufficiency. Alexander finds him sunbathing, surrounded by admirers. "I am Alexander the Great," the young king announces. Diogenes looks up at him and says, "And I am Diogenes the Cynic." Alexander asks if there is anything he can do for the philosopher. "Yes," Diogenes replies, "stand out of my sunlight." Alexander's companions expect him to be insulted, but instead he laughs. "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." The story reveals something about Alexander, his ability to appreciate qualities different from his own, his respect for those who cannot be bought or intimidated, perhaps even a wistfulness for a simpler life free from the burdens of power and ambition. But there is no time for philosophical reflection. News arrives from the north. The Illyrians and Thracians have risen in full rebellion, are threatening Macedonia itself. Alexander must march north immediately, must secure his northern borders before he can think of the Persian campaign. He leads his army into Thrace in the spring of 335 BCE. The campaign is brutal, fought in mountains and forests against enemies who know the terrain, who use guerrilla tactics, who fade away when confronted and strike when least expected. But Alexander proves himself not just brave, but tactically brilliant. He adapts to each situation, uses innovative formations, takes risks that terrify his veterans, but succeed brilliantly. At Mount Haemus, his army encounters Thracian tribes holding the high ground, ready to roll wagons full of stones down onto the advancing Macedonians. Alexander orders his men to lock shields overhead where possible, to lie flat and let the wagons roll over them where the pass is too narrow. It works. The wagons pass harmlessly over the prone soldiers, and the Macedonians charge up the mountain, routing the Thracians. He crosses the Danube, that great river marking the edge of the known world, by building a bridge of boats in a single night, surprises the tribes on the far side, and wins a crushing victory. He marches west to confront the Illyrians, defeats them in a complex battle that involves coordinating infantry, cavalry, and light troops in difficult terrain. Within months, Alexander has secured Macedonia's northern borders, has proven himself as a general, has shown that he can not only match Philip's achievements, but surpass them. The army that was Philip's creation is now truly Alexander's, loyal to him personally, confident in his leadership, ready to follow him anywhere. But then, while Alexander is still in the north, a rumor reaches Greece. Alexander is dead, killed in battle against the Illyrians. The rumor is false, but in Thebes, desperate for freedom, people believe it or want to believe it. The Thebans rise in rebellion, besieging the Macedonian garrison in their citadel, calling on other Greek cities to join them in throwing off the Macedonian yoke. When news of the rebellion reaches Alexander, he marches south with a speed that seems almost supernatural. In 2 weeks, he covers the distance that should take twice as long, appears at Thebes before most Greeks even know he is coming. He gives the Thebans a chance to surrender, to submit and be forgiven. They refuse, confident in their walls, perhaps still half believing Alexander is dead or that Greek solidarity will save them. The siege is short but fierce. Alexander's engineers assault the walls while his infantry probes for weak points. The Macedonian garrison inside the citadel makes a sortie. Simultaneously, Alexander's forces breach the walls. The city falls in a matter of days. What happens next is calculated terror, a message written in blood and rubble. Alexander puts the fate of Thebes to a vote of the League of Corinth. What should be done with this rebellious city? The other Greek cities, jealous of Thebes, resentful of old rivalries, vote for destruction. Alexander carries out their decision with a thoroughness that chills all Greece. Thebes is razed to the ground. Every building is demolished, except the temples and the house of the poet Pindar, whom Alexander admires. 6,000 Thebans are killed in the fighting and the massacre that follows. 30,000 survivors, men, women, children, are sold into slavery. One of Greece's great cities, home to Epaminondas who defeated Sparta, to the sacred band that fought so bravely, is erased from the map as if it had never been. It is brutal, shocking, deliberate. Alexander wants every Greek city to understand what rebellion means, what will happen to those who defy him. The message is received. Athens, which had been encouraging Theban resistance, immediately sends ambassadors begging forgiveness. Other cities hasten to reaffirm their loyalty. No one will rebel against Alexander now. Greece is his, secured not just through the League of Corinth's political structure, but through raw fear. Alexander returns to Macedonia in the autumn of 335 BCE. In less than 2 years since Philip's assassination, he has secured his throne, crushed rebellions to the north and south, proven himself in battle, established control over Greece, and demonstrated a ruthlessness that matches his father's. He is 21 years old. But crushing Thebes weighs on him in ways he doesn't fully acknowledge. Years later, in Asia, when things go wrong, when his luck seems to turn, Alexander will wonder if the gods are punishing him for Thebes, if he destroyed something sacred, if the blood of those thousands cries out for vengeance. The decision was politically necessary, militarily effective, but morally haunting. It is the first of many times when Alexander will find that the requirements of power conflict with the ideals he was taught at MACEDON, when the conqueror and the student of Aristotle exist in uncomfortable tension. But those regrets are for later. Now, in the winter of 335-334 BCE, Alexander prepares for the great enterprise, the campaign his father dreamed of but never launched, the invasion of Persia. The Persian Empire is the colossus of the ancient world, vast,
ancient, seemingly eternal. It stretches from the Mediterranean to India, from the Caucasus Mountains to Egypt and beyond. It is ruled for more than 2 centuries, since Cyrus the Great conquered the Medes and Babylonians and created the largest empire the world had yet seen. It has defeated every challenge, absorbed every conquest, endured through changes of dynasty. When Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BCE, he brought armies so large they drank rivers dry. Though the Greeks defeated him, Persia remained dominant, the great power of the East. Now Alexander prepares to invade this empire with an army of perhaps 35,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, a force that seems absurdly small for such an ambitious undertaking. But it is the finest army in the world, battle-hardened, well-equipped, superbly trained. The phalanx, with its 18-foot sarissas, can hold off any frontal assault. The companion cavalry, nobles fighting beside their king, can break any line with their charges. The siege engineers can take any city. The logistics corps can supply an army on the march.
More importantly, the army is led by Alexander. In 2 years, he has proven himself beyond all doubt. The soldiers believe in him, trust his judgment, are willing to follow him into the unknown. And Alexander has something else, a vision that goes beyond mere conquest. He sees himself as Achilles reborn, destined for glory and immortal fame. He sees the campaign as revenge for Xerxes' invasion, as Greece finally striking back. He sees himself spreading Greek civilization to the barbarous East, bringing culture and enlightenment to the Persian Empire. Whether these are rationalizations for ambition or genuine beliefs hardly matters. They drive him forward, give him a sense of destiny that communicates itself to everyone around him. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander marches his army to the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. His engineers build a bridge of boats. At the narrowest point, where Europe and Asia are closest, Alexander himself sacrifices to the gods, pours libations into the sea, asks for their blessing on his enterprise. Then he does something remarkable, something theatrical, something that reveals his sense of himself and his mission. He takes a spear and from the European shore hurls it across the strait into Asian soil. He is claiming Asia by right of the spear, by conquest, marking this moment as the beginning of something unprecedented. Then he boards a ship and crosses the Hellespont. Halfway across, he sacrifices a bull to Poseidon and pours golden cups into the sea as offerings to the Nereids and to Achilles, his ancestor and model. When the ship reaches the Asian shore, Alexander is the first to leap off, the first to set foot on Asian soil, planting his spear in the ground. They march north to Troy, that legendary city where Achilles fought and died, where the Greeks besieged King Priam for 10 years. The actual city is long gone, just ruins and legends remaining. But Alexander makes a pilgrimage to the supposed tomb of Achilles, runs naked around it in the ancient custom, lays a wreath, declares that Achilles was fortunate to have Homer sing his deeds. Hephaestion, his beloved companion, lays a wreath at the tomb of Patroclus, Achilles' companion and lover. The parallel is clear, deliberate. Alexander is Achilles, Hephaestion is Patroclus. They are writing their own epic, living the heroic age reborn. From Troy, they march south along the coast of Asia Minor. The Persian satraps, the governors of the western provinces, have gathered their forces, preparing to meet the Macedonian invasion. They have perhaps 40,000 troops, including Greek mercenaries who serve Persia for gold, fighting against their own people for foreign pay. The armies meet at the Granicus River in early summer 334 BCE. The Persians hold the far bank, their cavalry waiting, their infantry behind them. It is late afternoon, and Alexander's generals advise waiting until morning to attack. The sun is low, the men are tired from marching, the river is a natural obstacle. But Alexander refuses to wait. He wants the psychological advantage of immediate action, wants to show the Persians that he is not cautious, but audacious.
He orders the attack. He personally leads the companion cavalry into the river, charging toward the Persian line. It is reckless, dangerous. He is the king, and he is in the forefront of the most desperate part of the battle. The water is chest deep on the horses, the current strong, the far bank steep. The Persians rain javelins and arrows down on the Macedonians struggling in the water. Alexander's horse is killed under him. He mounts another, keeps fighting. Persian nobles surround him, recognizing him by his distinctive armor and the white plumes on his helmet. One Persian brings a battle axe down on Alexander's helmet, splitting it, wounding him slightly. Cletus, one of Alexander's officers, saves him, killing the Persian with a spear thrust. The fighting is desperate, close, brutal. But gradually the Macedonians gain the far bank, establish a foothold, push the Persians back. The phalanx crosses and engages the Persian infantry. The Persian line breaks. They flee, leaving thousands dead, including many of the satraps and Persian nobles who commanded them. The Greek mercenaries who fought for Persia try to surrender. Alexander, seeing them as traitors, orders them all killed or captured. 2,000 die in the slaughter. 2,000 more are sent back to Macedonia in chains to work as slaves in the mines. It is harsh, meant as a warning to other Greeks who might fight for Persian gold. But for everyone else, the Persian soldiers, the civilians in captured cities, Alexander shows remarkable clemency. Cities that surrender are treated well, their governments left intact, their people unmolested. Alexander presents himself as a liberator, freeing the Greek cities of Asia Minor from Persian rule, respecting local customs and religions. The victory at the Granicus River opens Asia Minor to Alexander. City after city submits. The Greek cities especially welcome him, or at least accept him, as better than Persian rule. Within months, the entire western coast of Asia Minor is his. The young king who 2 years ago was fighting to secure his throne, who was dismissed by Persian ambassadors as insignificant, has now defeated Persian armies, conquered Persian provinces, announced himself as a serious threat to the greatest empire in the world. But this is only the beginning. The Persians have barely begun to mobilize their vast resources. The great king Darius III now knows that the Macedonian invasion is not a raid, but a serious campaign. He begins gathering armies from across his empire, preparing to crush this upstart who dares challenge Persian power. Alexander marches on, deeper into Asia, toward battles that will decide the fate of empires, toward a destiny he cannot fully imagine, but somehow knows awaits him.
The autumn of 334 BCE finds Alexander moving south along the coast of Asia Minor, accepting the submission of cities, installing governors, reorganizing the territories he conquers. He is not simply raiding, he is building an empire, creating administrative structures that will endure after his armies move on. The Greek cities of the coast especially receive favorable treatment. Democracies are restored where tyrants ruled under Persian authority, taxes are reduced or eliminated. Alexander presents himself as a liberator, and many genuinely see him that way. But not everyone submits peacefully. The city of Miletus closes its gates, confident in its strong walls and the Persian fleet anchored offshore. Alexander besieges it with characteristic thoroughness. His engineers bring up siege towers and battering rams. His navy, smaller than the Persian fleet but better positioned, blocks the harbor. Within weeks, Miletus falls. Alexander's terms are generous for the citizens, but harsh for the Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia, continuing his policy of punishing Greeks who serve foreign masters. Further south, Halicarnassus, a strongly fortified city with massive walls built by the Persians, resists. Here, the siege lasts months, involving sophisticated military engineering. Alexander's men tunnel under walls, build towers taller than the city's fortifications, wage a cat-and-mouse game with sorties and counter-sorties. The Persian commander, Memnon of Rhodes, perhaps the most capable Greek general in Persian service, directs a skilled defense. But eventually, section by section, Alexander's forces break through. The Persians and their mercenaries evacuate by sea, abandoning the city. Alexander raises the fortifications, establishes a garrison, and marches on. Winter approaches, and Alexander makes a decision that surprises his generals. Instead of consolidating his gains and wintering on the coast, he marches inland into the heart of Anatolia. His stated purpose is to secure his flank, to prevent Persian forces from threatening his supply lines. But there is something else at work. Alexander is drawn inland, toward the legendary cities of Anatolia, toward challenges that call to something in his nature. At Gordium, the ancient capital of Phrygia, he encounters one of history's most famous puzzles. In the temple of Zeus stands an ancient wagon, its yoke bound to a pole with a complex knot of cornel bark, tied so cunningly that no one can find where it begins or ends. Legend says whoever unties the Gordian knot will rule all of Asia. Many have tried, all have failed. Alexander examines the knot, attempts to untie it, finds it impossible. Then, with characteristic directness, he draws his sword and slices through it with a single stroke. The prophecy says nothing about how the knot must be undone, only that it must be undone. Whether this actually happened or is symbolic myth hardly matters. The story captures something essential about Alexander: his refusal to accept limitations, his willingness to find creative solutions, his conviction that rules are for other people. As spring comes in 333 BCE, news arrives that changes everything. Darius III himself, the great king, king of kings, master of the Persian Empire, is gathering an enormous army to face Alexander personally. No longer will Alexander fight governors and regional forces. Now he will face the full might of Persia, commanded by its emperor. Darius is not the warrior Philip was, not the general Alexander is proving himself to be. He is a bureaucrat who became king almost by accident, the last survivor of a royal family decimated by court intrigues. But he has the resources of an empire behind him, can field armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, can draw on military traditions going back to Cyrus the Great. Alexander marches south along the coast, moving into Syria. His army numbers perhaps 40,000 now. He has lost men to garrisons and casualties, but gained reinforcements from Macedonia. Darius brings perhaps 100,000 troops, though ancient numbers are notoriously unreliable, often vastly inflated. What matters is that the Persian army is significantly larger, contains the empire's best troops, and is led by the great king himself. The armies meet at Issus in November 333 BCE, in a coastal plain pinched between mountains and sea. The terrain actually favors Alexander. The narrow battlefield prevents Darius from using his numerical superiority to envelop the Macedonian army. The two armies face each other across the Panaris River, small but deep, an obstacle that will complicate any attack. Darius positions himself in the center with his best infantry, the Greek mercenaries who serve him, the Persian royal guard. His cavalry is on the flanks. His plan is simple: hold Alexander's attack, use his superior numbers to grind down the Macedonians, eventually overwhelm them through sheer weight of force. But Alexander has learned from the Granicus. He positions his phalanx to fix the Persian center, but the real attack will come from his cavalry on the right wing. He will personally lead the companion cavalry in a charge aimed directly at Darius himself. If he can break through to the great king, can kill or capture him, the battle will be won, regardless of what happens elsewhere. The battle begins with Alexander leading his cavalry across the river at an angle, charging toward the Persian center where Darius commands from his chariot. The fighting is fierce, confused, desperate. The Macedonian phalanx struggles to cross the river while under attack. For a moment, it seems the battle might go either way. But Alexander's cavalry breaks through. They smash into the Persian royal guard, cutting towards Darius. Alexander himself is in the thick of it, fighting hand to hand, his white plumes marking him as a target. His horse is wounded, stabbed in the haunch by a spear, but keeps fighting, keeps carrying him forward. And then Darius sees Alexander coming for him, sees the Macedonian cavalry cutting through his guards, realizes that he is about to be captured or killed.
He makes the decision that will haunt him and define him. He flees. He turns his chariot and runs from the battlefield, abandoning his army.
When the Persian troops see their king fleeing, the center collapses. Panic spreads. The Persian army disintegrates into rout, men throwing down their weapons and running. Alexander's cavalry pursues, cutting down fleeing soldiers, but Alexander himself has a different target. He chases after Darius, desperate to capture the great king, to end the war in this single moment. But Darius has too great a head start. He abandons his chariot for a horse, rides faster, escapes into the gathering darkness. Alexander has won a crushing victory, thousands of Persians dead, the army scattered, but Darius himself has escaped to fight another day. Yet Alexander has captured something almost as valuable, Darius's camp, with all its treasure and, more importantly, Darius's family. The great king's mother, his wife, his 2 daughters, his young son, all are taken prisoner. The royal tent is captured intact, revealing the unimaginable luxury in which the Persian king travels. Alexander, covered in dust and blood, sees the golden furniture, the magnificent carpets, the servants waiting to prepare the king's bath, and says, "So this, it seems, is what it means to be a king." He treats the royal family with surprising courtesy and respect. When the queen mother prostrates herself before Hephaestion, mistaking him for Alexander because he is taller, Alexander gently corrects her. "Mother, you are not mistaken. He too is Alexander," revealing the depth of his bond with his companion. He assures the royal women that Darius is alive, that they will not be harmed, that they will be treated with the dignity appropriate to their station. It is both genuine kindness and shrewd politics. By treating them well, he shows himself civilized rather than barbaric, a legitimate ruler rather than a mere conqueror. Darius, gathering the remnants of his army in the east, sends ambassadors to Alexander offering peace. He will give Alexander all Persian territory west of the Euphrates River, will pay an enormous ransom for his family, will marry his daughter to Alexander, making him his son-in-law. It is a generous offer, much of the richest part of the empire, recognition as an equal, peace with honor. Alexander discusses the offer with his generals in council. Parmenion, the old general who served Philip, speaks up. "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander replies, "So would I if I were Parmenion." He rejects the offer. He doesn't want part of the Persian Empire. He wants it all. Instead of pursuing Darius immediately into Mesopotamia, Alexander turns south along the Mediterranean coast. His strategic thinking is sound. Before he can safely march deep into Persia, he must secure his rear, must eliminate the Persian fleet that still controls the sea. And the Persian fleet depends on ports along the Phoenician coast, Sidon, Tyre, Gaza. Take those ports and the fleet becomes irrelevant, stranded without bases. Most cities submit without fighting. Sidon opens its gates immediately, but Tyre, ancient, wealthy, built on an island half a mile offshore with walls that rise directly from the sea, refuses. The Tyrians believe themselves impregnable. No army has ever taken Tyre by assault. Their walls are too strong, their position too secure. They will wait behind their fortifications until Alexander grows frustrated and marches away. They are about to learn that Alexander does not march away. The siege of Tyre lasts 7 months, from January to August of 332 BCE, and it is one of the most remarkable feats of military engineering in ancient history. Alexander cannot simply blockade the city, it receives supplies by sea. He must somehow bring his siege engines within range of the walls, which means he must build a causeway, a mole extending from the mainland to the island half a mile across open water. It seems impossible, but Alexander sets his men to work. They tear down old Tyre on the mainland, using the rubble to build the causeway. They sink ships to create a foundation. They drive pilings into the seabed. Slowly, incredibly, the causeway extends toward the island. The Tyrians try everything to stop them. They send ships to attack the workers. They shoot flaming arrows to set fire to the siege towers being built on the causeway. They send divers to sabotage the foundation. At one point, they send a fire ship, a vessel loaded with flammable materials, towards the causeway, setting Alexander's siege engines ablaze. But Alexander persists.
He brings up his navy, now augmented by ships from submitted Phoenician cities, to protect the workers and blockade Tyre. He builds new siege towers, taller and stronger than before. The causeway inches forward day by day, week by week. When it finally reaches the walls, Alexander's engineers go to work with battering rams, while ships equipped with siege engines attack from the sea. For days they pound the walls, looking for weaknesses. Finally, a section collapses. The Macedonians pour through, fighting street by street, house by house. The Tyrians resist to the last, fighting with the desperation of people who know no mercy will be shown. They are right. Alexander is furious at the cost of the siege. 7 months, countless men lost, his progress delayed. When Tyre finally falls in August 332 BCE, he crucifies 2,000 Tyrian men and sells 30,000 women and children into slavery. It is brutal, calculated, meant as a lesson. This is what happens to cities that defy Alexander. But Tyre's fall has wider implications. With the great Phoenician port in his hands, the Persian fleet's base of operations is eliminated. The causeway Alexander built remains. It still exists today, having slowly expanded into a permanent land bridge, transforming Tyre from an island into a peninsula. Alexander has literally changed geography, altered the coastline through sheer determination. Further south, Gaza resists, another strong fortress, another determined defense. Alexander lays siege, is wounded during the fighting. A bolt from a catapult strikes his shoulder, piercing his armor, but he refuses to leave the field until the city falls. When it does, he shows the same harshness he showed at Tyre, making clear that defiance brings destruction.
Now the coast is secure, and Egypt lies before him. Egypt, ancient beyond measure, whose civilization was already old when Greece was young. The Persian satrap in Egypt, seeing Alexander's unstoppable progress, wisely chooses not to resist. The Egyptians themselves welcome Alexander, seeing him as a liberator from Persian rule. The Persians had shown insufficient respect for Egyptian religion and tradition. Alexander, always politically astute, makes a point of honoring Egyptian gods, performing the proper ceremonies, presenting himself as Egypt's rightful ruler rather than a foreign conqueror. At Memphis, the ancient capital, Alexander is crowned pharaoh with all the traditional ceremonies. He becomes officially the son of Ra, divine ruler of the two kingdoms, legitimate successor to the pharaohs who built the pyramids. Whether Alexander believes this literally or sees it as useful political theater is impossible to say. Probably both. He has a mystical streak, believes in his own special destiny, but he also understands the importance of symbols and ceremonies in legitimizing rule. But the most significant moment of Alexander's time in Egypt is his journey to the oracle of Zeus Ammon at the Siwa oasis, hundreds of miles into the Libyan desert. Why does he go? The official reason is to consult the oracle, to ask questions about his campaign, to receive divine guidance. But there is something deeper, more personal. Zeus Ammon is identified with Zeus, king of the Greek gods, but also with the Egyptian god Amun, creator and father of pharaohs. There were rumors, spread by Olympias, perhaps believed by Alexander, that Philip was not really his father, that Zeus came to Olympias in some supernatural visitation, that Alexander is literally the son of a god. The journey to Siwa is dangerous, crossing trackless desert where caravans regularly die of thirst. But Alexander makes it safely, guided, according to the stories, by birds and serpents sent by the gods. At the oracle, the high priest greets him. What exactly was said is unknown. Alexander keeps the details to himself. But the oracle apparently confirms what Alexander wants to hear, that he is indeed the son of Zeus Ammon, that he is destined for world conquest, that he is under divine protection. From this point on, Alexander's behavior changes subtly. He begins to take the divine honors more seriously, to expect treatment appropriate to a son of Zeus. His Macedonian companions, raised in a culture where kings are first among equals rather than divine beings, find this troubling. But Alexander is no longer just the king of Macedon. He is pharaoh of Egypt, is conquering the Persian Empire, is becoming something unprecedented for which there are no adequate precedents or titles. Before leaving Egypt,
Alexander founds a city at the western edge of the Nile Delta, where the coast curves north. He personally marks out the city's boundaries, specifies where the main streets should run, where temples should be built. The city is named, inevitably, Alexandria, the first of many cities that will bear his name, but the greatest, the one that will outlast all the others, that will become one of the world's great centers of learning and culture, home to the famous library and lighthouse, enduring through Roman and Byzantine and Islamic rule to the present day. Alexandria is more than just another conquered city. It represents Alexander's vision of what his conquests mean. Not just Macedonian rule over foreign peoples, but something new, a blending of Greek and Eastern cultures, a cosmopolitan world where learning and trade can flourish. It is his most lasting monument, still inhabited more than 2,300 years after he traced its boundaries. But Alexandria is for the future. In the spring of 331 BCE, Alexander marches east from Egypt back into Asia, moving toward the inevitable final confrontation with Darius. The great king has spent the past year and a half gathering a new army, even larger than before, from every corner of his vast empire. Persian cavalry from the plateau, infantry from the mountains, chariots from the eastern provinces, elephants from India, troops from a dozen nations speaking a dozen languages, all united under Persian command. Darius chooses his ground carefully this time. He will not fight in the constricted terrain where Alexander's superior tactics can overcome Persian numbers. He finds a broad plain near the town of Gaugamela in northern Mesopotamia and has it leveled further, cleared of obstacles, made perfect for his cavalry and chariots to maneuver. The armies meet on October 1st, 331 BCE. Darius has perhaps 100,000 troops, perhaps more. Ancient sources claim absurd numbers in the millions, but even more conservative modern estimates give him overwhelming numerical superiority. Alexander has perhaps 47,000 men. On paper, it should not be a contest. But Alexander has learned from Issus, and Darius, echoing his recent defeat, has also learned to fear Alexander, to know that this young Macedonian is unlike any enemy Persia has ever faced. The battle will decide the fate of the Persian Empire, will determine whether the ancient kingdom survives or whether a new order emerges from the west. Alexander knows this is the moment everything has been building towards. Victory here means the Persian Empire is his. Defeat means everything. His conquests, his ambitions, his life ends on this plain. As the two armies face each other in the dawn light, as Alexander addresses his troops one last time before the charge, as the sun rises over the plain of Gaugamela, the entire ancient world holds its breath, waiting to see which vision of the future will prevail.
The Battle of Gaugamela begins with terror. Darius unleashes his secret weapon, 200 scythed chariots, their wheels fitted with long blades designed to cut through infantry formations, to create panic and chaos, to break the Macedonian phalanx before the main engagement even begins. The chariots thunder across the plain toward Alexander's lines, dust rising, the earth shaking with their approach. But Alexander has prepared for this. His men have trained for exactly this moment. As the chariots approach, the Macedonian infantry opens lanes in their formation, letting the chariots pass harmlessly through, while light troops shoot at the drivers and horses. Some chariots are stopped, their horses brought down. Others race through the lanes and emerge behind the Macedonian lines, where they are quickly dealt with. The great weapon Darius counted on to break Alexander's army before the battle truly begins has failed completely, accomplished nothing except to reveal Persian desperation. Now the real battle commences. Darius's plan is to use his superior numbers to outflank Alexander's smaller army, to envelop it, to attack from all sides simultaneously. His cavalry begins moving to extend beyond Alexander's flanks to get around them. Alexander's response is brilliant, improvised, risky. He begins moving his entire army to the right, angling away from the Persian center. Darius, fearing that Alexander will move completely off the prepared ground onto rough terrain where the Persian cavalry will be less effective, extends his left wing further to match Alexander's movement. And this creates a gap. A space opens in the Persian line between the left wing extending to follow Alexander and the center where Darius himself commands. It is the opportunity Alexander has been waiting for, perhaps the opportunity he has been deliberately creating. He wheels the companion cavalry and charges directly into the gap, aiming once again straight for Darius. It is the same tactic that worked at Issus, but executed with even greater precision and violence. Alexander and his cavalry smash through the Persian lines like a spearhead, cutting toward the great king's position. The fighting around Darius is desperate, chaotic, the most intense of the battle. Persian cavalry and the royal guard throw themselves at the Macedonians, trying to protect their king. Alexander is in the thick of it, fighting hand to hand, always pushing forward, always moving toward Darius. And once again, Darius breaks. Seeing Alexander coming for him, seeing his guards cut down, seeing the white plumes of Alexander's helmet cutting through his defenses, the great king turns and flees. He abandons his army, his empire, his dignity, and runs for his life. But this time, the battle is not yet won. While Alexander has broken through to the Persian center, elsewhere the fighting continues. Part of the Macedonian phalanx has been penetrated by Persian and Indian cavalry. Persian troops have reached the Macedonian camp and are fighting among the baggage train. For a moment, the battle hangs in balance, could still go either way. Alexander wants to pursue Darius, to end this once and for all by capturing the great king, but his generals convince him that he must first secure the battlefield, must rescue the part of his army that is in trouble. Reluctantly, he turns back from the pursuit, leads his cavalry to reinforce the threatened sections of his line. His arrival tips the balance. The Persians, seeing their king has fled, seeing Alexander's cavalry returning from breaking through their center, lose heart. The retreat becomes a rout. The Persian army disintegrates, men fleeing in all directions, casting away weapons and armor to run faster. Alexander pursues for miles, his cavalry cutting down fleeing soldiers, but Darius himself has too great a lead and escapes again into the vastness of his empire. Alexander has won perhaps the most important battle in ancient history, the battle that breaks Persian power forever, that opens the heart of the empire to his conquest. But once again, the great king himself has slipped away. The casualties tell the story. Perhaps 300 Macedonians dead, perhaps 1,000 wounded. On the Persian side, tens of thousands dead or captured, the army shattered beyond repair. The Persian Empire has thrown its full might against Alexander and lost decisively. No army Darius can now raise will be able to challenge the Macedonians in open battle. The spoils of victory are staggering. Darius's camp is captured again, even more magnificent than at Issus. The Persian baggage train contains treasures beyond counting, gold and silver, precious stones, luxurious furnishings, the accumulated wealth of the world's richest empire. Alexander's men, many of whom began this campaign with barely enough to equip themselves, are suddenly rich beyond their wildest dreams. But the greater prize is strategic. The heart of the Persian Empire now lies open before Alexander. The great cities, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, have lost their defender. One by one, they will fall to the conqueror. Babylon is first. The ancient city, with its legendary walls so thick that chariots can race around their tops, its hanging gardens counted among the wonders of the world, its temples and palaces accumulated over centuries of imperial grandeur, Babylon could resist. Its fortifications are formidable, its supplies abundant. It could withstand a siege lasting years. But the Persian satrap who governs Babylon understands that resistance is futile. Darius has fled, the army is destroyed, Alexander is irresistible.
He comes out to meet Alexander with gifts and submission, opening the city's gates, welcoming the conqueror.
Alexander enters Babylon in triumph in late 331 BCE. He is 25 years old, and he is master of the greatest city in Asia. The Babylonians line the streets, scattering flowers, singing hymns. Their priests proclaim Alexander as the legitimate successor to the ancient kings of Babylon, as the chosen of Marduk, the city's patron god. Alexander, showing the same political intelligence he demonstrated in Egypt, respects Babylonian traditions, orders the rebuilding of temples that the Persians had neglected, participates in religious ceremonies, presents himself as a legitimate ruler rather than a foreign occupier. For his soldiers, Babylon is revelation and reward. They rest here after the campaign, enjoy luxuries they never imagined, spend their newfound wealth. The city's famous pleasures, its wine, its women, its theaters and gardens, are theirs to enjoy. For men who grew up in the mountains of Macedonia or the hills of Greece, Babylon represents unimaginable sophistication and wealth. From Babylon, Alexander marches to Susa, another of the Persian Empire's great capitals. Like Babylon, Susa surrenders without resistance. Here, Alexander seizes the accumulated treasure of Persian kings, perhaps 50,000 talents of gold and silver, an amount so vast it takes months just to count and catalog. It is more wealth than exists in all Greece, more than any Greek city-state has ever possessed, enough to finance armies for generations. But Alexander doesn't hoard this wealth. He pays his soldiers generously, rewards his officers lavishly, sends money back to Macedonia and Greece. The gold of Persia begins to flow through the ancient world, stimulating economies, funding construction projects, changing the balance of power. Alexander is not just conquering an empire, he is redistributing its wealth, creating a new economic order. Winter approaches, and Alexander marches toward Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, the city Darius I built to symbolize Persian glory, where every spring the great king received tribute from subject nations, where the palace complex sprawls across a terrace carved from the mountain, where the wealth of empire is concentrated. The approach to Persepolis leads through narrow mountain passes that could be defended by a small force against any army. Persian forces do attempt to hold these passes, but Alexander's troops force their way through in winter fighting that costs lives but achieves the objective. By January 330 BCE, Alexander stands before Persepolis. The city surrenders, and Alexander's troops are let loose to plunder it. For 3 days, they sack one of the richest cities in the world. Houses are ransacked, temples robbed, citizens killed or enslaved. It is ugly, brutal, perhaps inevitable. Soldiers who have campaigned for years, who have faced death repeatedly, who have conquered the greatest empire in the world, take their reward in blood and gold. Alexander himself seizes the royal treasury, another enormous sum, perhaps 120,000 talents, more than was taken at Susa. The wealth is so vast that it takes thousands of mules and camels months to transport it all. The Persian Empire's accumulated treasure, gold gathered over 2 centuries from tribute and taxes from Egypt to India, is now Alexander's. But the most controversial moment of Alexander's time in Persepolis comes in May 330 BCE, during a banquet celebrating the conquest. The Macedonians are drinking heavily, as is their custom. Someone, perhaps Thias, the courtesan who is companion to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals, proposes that they set fire to the palace of Xerxes, the king who burned Athens 150 years earlier during his invasion of Greece. It would be poetic justice, symbolic revenge for that ancient wrong. Whether Alexander is drunk, whether it is a spontaneous act or something he has been contemplating, whether it is genuine revenge or theater, he agrees.
He personally throws the first torch. The palace begins to burn. The great palace of Persepolis, built by Darius and Xerxes, its columns carved with processions of tribute-bearers from across the empire, its walls decorated with images of Persian kings in glory, all of it goes up in flames. The fire spreads through the palace complex, consuming centuries of Persian imperial grandeur in a single night. According to some sources, Alexander regrets it almost immediately, tries to have the fire extinguished. According to others, it is deliberate policy, a statement that the old Persian order is finished, that a new era has begun. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps in the moment it feels right, feels like justice and closure. But in the aftermath, Alexander sees that he has destroyed something irreplaceable, has burned the very symbol of the empire he now rules. Whatever the truth, the burning of Persepolis marks a turning point. The war of revenge against Persia, the campaign to punish the empire that once invaded Greece, is symbolically complete. The great cities have fallen, the treasuries are captured, the palace of Xerxes is ashes. Mission accomplished. But Alexander doesn't turn back. He cannot. He has become something more than a Greek general leading a revenge campaign. He is now the king of Asia, ruler of the Persian Empire, and an empire needs a legitimate ruler, needs to be governed, needs stability. And there is still Darius, the great king, twice defeated, twice fled from battle, but still alive, still theoretically the legitimate ruler, still a rallying point for Persian resistance. As long as Darius lives, the empire is not truly Alexander's. He must be captured or killed. The war must be finished completely. Darius has fled east, deeper into the vastness of his empire, to the provinces beyond the Zagros Mountains, to Bactria and Sogdiana, to lands that are Persian in culture, but far from the imperial heartland. He is gathering what forces he can, trying to raise new armies, perhaps hoping that distance and harsh terrain will protect him from the Macedonian pursuit. Alexander sets out in pursuit in the summer of 330 BCE. It becomes a desperate chase across hundreds of miles of harsh terrain. Alexander pushes his army hard, covering extraordinary distances, trying to catch Darius before he can escape completely into the far eastern provinces.
But Darius's own satraps and generals are losing faith in him. He has lost 3 major battles, has fled twice from the battlefield, has shown himself unable to defend the empire. The great cities have fallen, the treasuries are lost, the empire is collapsing. A group of Persian nobles, led by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, decide that Darius is a liability, that their best hope is to kill him and make peace with Alexander, or perhaps to kill him and continue resistance under new leadership. They take Darius prisoner, put him in chains, drag him along as they flee from Alexander's pursuit. When Alexander's advance forces get close, when capture seems imminent, they stab Darius and leave him dying by the roadside. A Macedonian soldier finds him, gives him water. Darius, the great king, king of kings, ruler of the empire that stretched from Egypt to India, dies in the dust beside a road in the middle of nowhere, killed by his own men, abandoned by everyone except an enemy soldier who shows him a moment of compassion. When Alexander arrives and sees Darius's body, he is moved to tears, or so the sources claim. Whether genuine grief or theater, he treats Darius's corpse with royal honors, has it sent back to Persepolis for burial among his ancestors, declares himself the avenger of the murdered king, the rightful heir to the Persian throne. It is a brilliant political move. Alexander is no longer the foreign conqueror. He is the legitimate successor to Darius, who died at the hands of traitors. The Persian nobles who submit to Alexander are not betraying their country. They are supporting the rightful king against rebels and murderers. Alexander transforms himself from enemy to avenger, from conqueror to heir. But this transformation comes at a cost to his relationship with his Macedonian companions. They followed him to conquer Persia, not to become Persians.
But Alexander is now dressing in Persian robes, is adopting Persian court ceremonies, is requiring the proskynesis, the prostration before the king that Persians consider normal courtesy, but Greeks see as worship appropriate only for gods. His Macedonian officers grumble. They have conquered the greatest empire in the world, and their king seems to be going native, seems to be forgetting that he's Macedonian, that they are Macedonians, that they conquered these people rather than joining them. Alexander sees it differently. He rules an empire now, not just Macedonia. Most of his subjects are Persian, and they expect their ruler to behave like a Persian king, to respect their traditions and customs. If he is to govern this vast territory effectively, he must be more than just a Macedonian conqueror. He must be a Persian king, an Egyptian pharaoh, the legitimate ruler of all these peoples. But to his Macedonian companions, raised in a culture where the king is first among equals, where speaking frankly to the king is a right and a duty, this seems like betrayal. The drinking parties that have always been part of Macedonian military culture become tense, arguments breaking out, the gap between Alexander's vision and his companions' expectations growing wider. The empire is Alexander's. The great cities have fallen. Darius is dead. The wealth of Persia fills his treasuries. He is 26 years old, and he has accomplished what his father dreamed of, what the Greeks fantasized about for generations, what no one thought possible. A reasonable person might stop here, might consolidate these conquests, organize the empire, enjoy the fruits of victory, might be satisfied with having conquered more territory than anyone in history, with ruling from Greece to Central Asia, with being richer and more powerful than any king has ever been. But Alexander is not reasonable. He has never been reasonable. He is driven by something deeper than logic, by ambition that cannot be satisfied, by a hunger for glory that grows with feeding, by the example of Achilles, who chose a short life of glory over a long life of obscurity. And there are still Bessus and the other Persian nobles who murdered Darius, who have fled to the far eastern provinces, who claim to continue Persian resistance. As long as they live, as long as any part of the former Persian Empire resists, Alexander's conquest is incomplete. So he marches on, deeper into Asia, toward the mountains of the Hindu Kush, toward Bactria and Sogdiana, toward lands so remote that most Greeks have barely heard of them, toward challenges that will test his army to its breaking point and beyond.
The pursuit of Bessus takes Alexander into a different world. Not the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, not the sophisticated cities of the Persian heartland, but the harsh, remote provinces of Central Asia, what is now Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, where mountains touch the sky and valleys hide fierce warriors who have never truly submitted to any empire. Bactria and Sogdiana are Persian in culture and administration, but the local peoples, tough, independent, expert horsemen and mountain fighters, have always been difficult to control. The Persian Empire ruled here more in theory than in practice, collecting tribute when convenient, leaving the local chieftains to govern themselves as long as they acknowledged Persian authority. Now Alexander must conquer this wild country, must hunt down Bessus and the other Persian nobles who fled here, must establish real control where Persian was satisfied with nominal submission. It will take 3 years, from 330 to 327 BCE, 3 years of grinding warfare unlike anything his army has experienced before. The campaign begins with a march that nearly destroys the army before they meet any enemy. To reach Bactria from Persia, Alexander must cross the Hindu Kush Mountains, those tremendous peaks that separate the Iranian plateau from Central Asia. It is early spring, 329 BCE, and the passes are still choked with snow. The army struggles through, men and horses dying of cold and altitude sickness, supplies running desperately short. They must slaughter pack animals for food, must burn their own siege equipment for warmth, must endure conditions that seem designed to kill them. But they make it through, descend into Bactria, and begin hunting Bessus.
The man who murdered Darius, who claimed the title of great king for himself, finds that his support melts away in the face of Alexander's advance. His own followers, seeing the Macedonians arriving despite the mountains, despite the impossible march, lose faith in their leader. They betray Bessus to Alexander, buying their own safety with his life. Alexander has Bessus mutilated, his nose and ears cut off in the Persian manner of punishing traitors, then sent back to Persia for execution. It is brutal but calculated, a message to anyone who might resist. This is what happens to those who kill their king and defy Alexander. But capturing Bessus does not end the resistance. Throughout Bactria and Sogdiana, local chieftains rise against Macedonian rule. This is not conventional warfare with armies meeting in open battle. This is guerrilla war. Ambushes in mountain passes, sieges of fortress cities built on seemingly inaccessible crags, raids on supply lines, a grinding, exhausting campaign where victory in one valley means nothing because the next valley remains hostile. Alexander adapts. He learns mountain warfare, learns siege tactics for strongholds built into cliff faces, learns to move quickly with light forces rather than relying on the phalanx that was so effective in open battle. He founds cities throughout the region, Alexandrias scattered across Central Asia, garrisoned with Macedonian and Greek settlers, meant to hold down the conquered territory, to spread Greek culture, to serve as permanent bases of occupation. But the human cost is terrible. Soldiers die not in glorious battles, but in ambushes, from disease, from the grinding exhaustion of campaigning year after year in hostile terrain. The army that crossed the Hellespont is being slowly worn away, replaced by reinforcements from home who never knew Macedonia in peacetime, who have known nothing but war and conquest. And the tensions between Alexander and his Macedonian companions grow worse. The adoption of Persian customs, which began after Darius's death, intensifies. Alexander wears Persian dress regularly now, sits on a throne in the Persian manner, insists on elements of Persian court ceremony. To rule Persians, he argues, he must be a Persian king. But his Macedonians see it as he is forgetting who he is, forgetting that they conquered these people, that Macedonians are superior to these barbarians they defeated. The drinking parties become more frequent and more intense, the wine flowing freely, arguments breaking out, old resentments surfacing. And then, in the autumn of 328 BCE, comes the event that will haunt Alexander for the rest of his life. There at Maracanda, a Sogdian city, modern Samarkand, celebrating another victory with a banquet in the Macedonian style. The wine is flowing freely, too freely. Alexander and his companions are drunk, as they often are, the loudness and contentiousness growing. Someone begins praising Alexander's achievements, claiming he has surpassed Philip, that his victories are greater than his father's. Cletus, one of Alexander's oldest companions, the man who saved his life at the Granicus River, who has served the Macedonian kings for decades, speaks up for Philip's defense. Philip was the greater king, Cletus says. Philip created the army that Alexander inherited. Philip's victories made everything Alexander has accomplished possible. The argument escalates, fueled with wine and years of accumulated tension. Cletus attacks Alexander's Persian dress, his Persian ceremonies, his forgetting of Macedonian ways. "You're becoming a Persian," he says, or something like it. "You're forgetting your own people, forgetting that Macedonian blood won you this empire." Alexander's temper, never fully under control, snaps. He grabs a spear from a guard, and before anyone can stop him, hurls it at Cletus. The spear strikes true, pierces him through the chest. He falls, dies almost instantly, blood pooling on the floor of the banquet hall.
For a moment, there is absolute silence. Everyone is frozen, shocked. Alexander himself seems shocked, as if only now realizing what he has done. He has killed Cletus, his companion, his savior, his friend, in a drunken rage over an argument. The aftermath is terrible. Alexander collapses, apparently hysterical with grief and horror. He tears the spear from Clytus's body and tries to turn it on himself, but his guards prevent him. He retreats to his tent and will not come out, will not eat or drink, lies prostrate with grief for 3 days. His companions worry that he might die of despair, that the guilt will destroy him. They bring philosophers and seers to counsel him, to convince him that it was an accident, that the gods willed it, that he must go on living and leading. Eventually he emerges, but something has broken in him, or perhaps something was already broken and now everyone can see it. The killing of Clytus reveals the darkness growing in Alexander. The long campaigns, the constant warfare, the wine, the pressure of ruling an empire, the widening gap between his vision and his companions' expectations, all of it is taking a toll. He has killed a friend in rage, has demonstrated that his power is absolute and his temper deadly. And the campaigns continue. There is a plot against his life, the Pages Conspiracy, organized by young Macedonian nobles who serve as his attendants and companions. They resent his Persian ways, resent being expected to prostrate themselves, resent the discipline he imposes. The plot is discovered before it can be carried out. The conspirators are arrested, tortured, executed. But the investigation expands, looking for accomplices, for anyone who might have known about the plot. Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew, who accompanied the expedition as its official historian, falls under suspicion. He has been critical of Alexander's adoption of Persian customs, has refused to perform proskynesis, has argued that Greeks should not worship living men as gods. He is arrested, implicated in the conspiracy, probably falsely, probably because Alexander wants to silence a critic and punish Aristotle for not supporting the proskynesis. Callisthenes is executed or dies in custody. When Aristotle, back in Athens at the Lyceum, hears that his nephew is dead, that Alexander has killed him, the relationship between the old teacher and his former student is irreparably damaged. They will never communicate again. But even these horrors do not end the campaigns. By 327 BCE, Alexander has finally pacified Bactria and Sogdiana, has established control through a network of garrison cities and alliances with local rulers. Part of this pacification involves marriage. Alexander marries Roxana, daughter of a Bactrian nobleman, cementing an alliance and showing that he values his new Persian subjects as much as his Macedonian companions. Roxana is beautiful, apparently intelligent, genuinely loved by Alexander, or at least he treats her with honor and affection. But the marriage also has political calculation. By taking a Bactrian wife, by having children who will be half Macedonian and half Asian, Alexander is binding his empire together through blood, creating a new kind of imperial dynasty that transcends ethnic boundaries. But his Macedonians see it as another betrayal, another sign that Alexander is abandoning them for these foreign peoples they conquered. With Central Asia secured, Alexander looks beyond it, to the east, to India. The Persian Empire once claimed suzerainty over parts of northwestern India, the lands beyond the Indus River. If Alexander is truly the heir to the Persian Empire, if he is to claim all that Darius ruled, he must go there. But there is more to it than that. India represents the edge of the known world for Greeks, a land of mystery and legend, of fabulous wealth and strange peoples, of elephants and gymnosophists and rivers larger than any in Greece. To go to India is to go beyond where Dionysus went, beyond where Heracles went, to surpass even the gods in his travels and conquests. So, in the spring of 327 BCE, Alexander marches his army east from Bactria, crossing the Hindu Kush again, easier now than the first terrible crossing, but still challenging, descending into the valleys of what is now eastern Afghanistan and Pakistan. The army is different now than the one that crossed the Hellespont. Many of the original Macedonians are dead or invalided home. The ranks are filled with Greek mercenaries, with Persians and Bactrians integrated into the army, with troops from a dozen conquered peoples. It is becoming a truly international force, united not by ethnicity, but by loyalty to Alexander. The Indus River crossing in spring 326 BCE is an engineering feat.
bridges of boats spanning the broad river, the army marching across in perfect order. Local rulers come to submit or to offer alliance. Some resist and are crushed. Others welcome Alexander as a liberator from their own local rivals, offering troops and supplies for his campaigns. The greatest of these allies is King Taxiles, ruler of Taxila, a sophisticated city, a center of learning and culture. Taxiles sees in Alexander a powerful ally against his neighbor and enemy, King Porus, who rules the lands between the Hydaspes and Assassines rivers. Taxiles welcomes Alexander, feasts him, offers his support and troops. And so, in May 326 BCE, Alexander marches against Porus, approaching the Hydaspes River, swollen with monsoon rains, running fast and deep, a formidable obstacle. On the far bank, Porus waits with his army, including something Alexander has never faced before: war elephants, dozens of them, trained for battle, capable of breaking any cavalry charge, of crushing infantry beneath their feet.
The Battle of the Hydaspes is Alexander's last great set-piece battle, and perhaps his most brilliant tactical performance. He cannot cross the river directly. Porus's army is watching. The elephants are waiting. So Alexander divides his forces, makes feints at multiple crossing points, keeps Porus's army marching back and forth along the riverbank, never knowing where the real crossing will come. Then, on a stormy night, with thunder and rain providing cover, Alexander takes a picked force upstream, crosses at an unexpected point, and marches to take Porus in the flank. When dawn breaks and Porus realizes what has happened, he must fight on two fronts: Alexander's force that has crossed upstream, and the main Macedonian army crossing now that Porus has moved to face Alexander. The battle is desperate, fierce. The elephants are terrifying. The Macedonian horses panic at their smell and trumpeting. Infantry are crushed beneath their feet. But Alexander's tactics prevail. His archers target the elephant drivers and the elephants themselves. His cavalry attacks from the flanks, avoiding the elephants. Slowly, methodically, the Macedonian army grinds down the Indian forces. Porus himself fights with magnificent courage, mounted on the largest elephant, commanding his troops to the end, refusing to flee even when the battle is clearly lost. Only when wounded, when his elephant is exhausted, does he finally stop fighting. Alexander rides up to him. "How should I treat you?" he asks. Porus, despite his defeat, replies with dignity, "Treat me as a king." Alexander, who admires courage above all, is moved. He not only spares Porus's life, but restores his kingdom, makes him an ally, adds territory to his domain. It is Alexander at his best, generous in victory, respectful of worthy enemies, building an empire through magnanimity as well as force. But the victory at the Hydaspes is the high water mark of Alexander's conquests. Beyond the Hydaspes lie more rivers, more kingdoms, eventually the Ganges River and the kingdoms of the Indian heartland, rich and powerful with vast armies. Alexander wants to go on, to reach the ocean, the body of water that Greeks believe encircles the world, that marks the absolute edge of the earth. To reach the ocean would be to conquer the world completely, to go as far as it is possible to go. But his army has reached its limit. They have been campaigning for 8 years since crossing the Hellespont, have marched thousands of miles, have fought in every kind of terrain and climate, have gone beyond anything they ever imagined. They are exhausted, wounded, homesick, wealthy beyond their dreams, but desperate to enjoy that wealth back home rather than dying in distant lands. At the Hyphasis River, the furthest east Alexander will ever reach, the army mutinies, not violently, not with weapons, but simply by refusing to go further. The soldiers will not march. They will not cross this river. They have had enough. Alexander rages, pleads, tries every form of persuasion. He sulks in his tent for 3 days, waiting for them to change their minds, but they do not. Even Coenus, one of his most loyal generals, speaks for the army. They have done enough, conquered enough. suffered enough. It is time to go home. Finally, Alexander accepts the inevitable. He performs sacrifices, receives unfavorable omens, conveniently confirming what he must do anyway, and announces that they will turn back. The army erupts in cheers and tears of relief. They will not march beyond the Hyphasis. They will turn around, begin the long journey home. But Alexander, even in turning back, cannot take the simple route. Instead of retracing their steps through Bactria and Persia, he decides to explore new territory, to descend the Indus River to the ocean, to march through southern regions that no Greek has visited. If he cannot go further east, he will at least explore the south, will reach the ocean by a different route, will ensure that his conquests are as complete as possible. So begins the descent of the Indus, a campaign as bloody and difficult as any they have fought. Local tribes resist, and Alexander besieges their cities with methodical ruthlessness. At one city, the Mali capital, Alexander is badly wounded. He scales a wall ahead of his troops in characteristic recklessness, finds himself cut off with only 3 companions, fights desperately until an arrow pierces his chest, penetrating his lung. His troops, thinking he is dead, go berserk, massacring the entire city in revenge. Alexander survives, barely, but the wound weakens him, never fully heals. For weeks his life hangs in balance. When he finally recovers enough to appear before his army, rumors of his death have spread, and his soldiers weep with relief at seeing him alive. Finally, in summer 325 BCE, the army reaches the Indus Delta, reaches the ocean that marks the world's edge. Alexander sacrifices to the gods, pours libations into the sea, gazes out at the endless waters. He has reached the end of the world, or at least one end of it. But the return journey will be the hardest of all, will cost more lives than any battle, will test the army to its absolute breaking point. Alexander divides his forces. Part of the army will return by ship, exploring the coast. Part will march through the interior, and Alexander himself will lead the main force directly across the Gedrosian Desert, modern southern Iran and Pakistan, the most direct route, but also the most dangerous, a wasteland where few armies have ever survived. Why does he choose this route? Perhaps to explore unknown territory, perhaps to prove he can succeed where others failed, perhaps because something in him needs the challenge, needs the suffering, cannot accept the easy path. The march through the Gedrosian Desert is a nightmare. The heat is unbearable, the water scarce, the terrain brutal. Men die of thirst, of exposure, of exhaustion. Pack animals collapse and are abandoned. Equipment is thrown away to lighten loads. Discipline breaks down as men struggle simply to survive. No one knows exactly how many die, perhaps a quarter of the army, perhaps more. When they finally stagger out of the desert weeks later, emerge into fertile lands where water and food are available, they are a broken force, traumatized by what they endured. And all of it, all the suffering, all the deaths, was unnecessary. They could have taken easier routes, but Alexander chose the desert, chose to test himself and his army one more time, chose challenge over safety. It is the clearest sign that something is broken in Alexander, that the ambition that drove him to greatness is becoming destructive, that he cannot stop pushing, cannot accept limitations, even when those limitations are simple human endurance. The army that emerges from the Gedrosian Desert in late 325 BCE is not the same army that crossed the Hellespont 9 years earlier. It is diminished, traumatized, exhausted. But it has conquered the Persian Empire and beyond, has marched from Greece to India, has achieved something unprecedented in human history. And Alexander, 30 years old, master of the largest empire the world has ever seen, returns to the heart of his domains, to Babylon, to begin the work of organizing and governing what he has conquered, to plan new campaigns. For even now, he cannot imagine simply stopping, simply being satisfied with what he has achieved. Alexander returns to find his empire in disarray. In his absence, governors and satraps have grown corrupt, have assumed he would never return, have acted as independent rulers rather than administrators. Some have embezzled funds, others have raised private armies, still others have oppressed the populations under their control. The discipline and organization Philip created, that Alexander relied upon, has frayed during the long years of campaigning in distant lands. Alexander's response is characteristically ruthless. Corrupt governors are removed, tried, executed. 6 satraps are put to death for various crimes, real or alleged, sending a clear message that Alexander's authority is absolute, that his absence does not mean freedom to act independently. It is efficient but brutal, and it creates fear throughout the administrative structure. No one is safe, no one's position is secure except through perfect obedience to Alexander's will. But alongside the purges, Alexander implements a vision for his empire that is revolutionary, that goes beyond simple conquest to something unprecedented. He has conquered an empire, but he wants to create something new, a fusion of Greek and Persian cultures, a unified world where East and West blend together, where the conquered peoples are not subjects but participants in a new cosmopolitan order. At Susa in 324 BCE, he organizes a mass wedding ceremony that symbolizes this vision. 90 of his Macedonian officers marry Persian noblewomen in a single ceremony, conducted according to Persian and Greek traditions simultaneously. Alexander himself takes 2 more wives, Statera, daughter of Darius III, and Parysatis, daughter of the Persian king Artaxerxes III. He is already married to Roxana, so these are political marriages, dynastic alliances, but they represent his commitment to blending the ruling classes of Macedonia and Persia. 10,000 of his soldiers also marry Asian women in the same ceremony. Alexander offers them gifts, pays their debts, celebrates their unions. It is spectacular theater, a demonstration of his vision of a unified empire where blood and culture mix, where the divisions between conqueror and conquered dissolve. But his Macedonian soldiers see it differently. To them, these marriages feel like dilution, like Alexander replacing them with Persians, like their unique position as the conquerors is being undermined. The grumbling that has gone on for years becomes louder, more open. And then Alexander makes a decision that brings tensions to a breaking point. He announces that 10,000 veteran Macedonian soldiers, men who have served for years, who have campaigned from Greece to India, who are now aging, wounded, exhausted, will be discharged and sent home with generous bonuses. Simultaneously, he is incorporating 30,000 young Persians into the army, trained in Macedonian warfare, equipped in Macedonian style, ready to replace the veterans. The Macedonians explode in fury. They see this as ultimate betrayal. They have conquered the world for Alexander, have endured unimaginable hardships, have made him master of Asia, and now he is replacing them with Persians, sending them home like discarded tools. At a mass assembly at Opis, they shout Alexander down, refuse his orders, demand that he dismiss all of them if he loves Persians so much, that he should conquer the rest of the world with his Persian troops and his divine father Zeus. It is the most serious mutiny of Alexander's reign, more dangerous than the refusal at the Hyphasis, because it happens at the heart of his empire, involves his entire army, challenges his authority completely. Alexander's response is characteristic. First, fury. He leaps from the platform, personally seizes the ringleaders, and has 13 of them executed immediately. Then, manipulation. He dismisses the entire Macedonian army, retreats to his palace, begins openly favoring Persian troops, giving them Macedonian military titles, organizing them as if the Macedonians no longer exist. For 2 days, the standoff continues. Alexander remains in his palace. The Macedonians, stunned by his reaction, begin to realize he is serious, that he might actually replace them entirely with Persians, that they might lose everything they have fought for. Finally, they break. They come to Alexander's quarters begging forgiveness, weeping, asking to be taken back. Alexander comes out to address them,
and there is a remarkable moment of reconciliation. He weeps too, talks about their shared history, about everything they have accomplished together. He calls them his kinsmen, embraces their leaders, declares that all Macedonians are his relatives. A great feast follows, the banquet of Opus, where 9,000 guests celebrate together, Macedonians and Persians sitting side by side, priests of different religions offering blessings, everyone drinking from the same mixing bowls. Alexander prays for harmony and partnership between Macedonians and Persians, for his empire to be unified not just through force, but through genuine cooperation. It is a beautiful vision, genuinely moving, perhaps even sincere, but it's also fragile, imposed from above by Alexander's will, not growing organically from his peoples. And it depends entirely on Alexander himself, on his charisma, his authority, his ability to hold these disparate elements together through force of personality. After Opus, the discharged veterans, those who genuinely want to go home, depart for Macedonia under the command of Craterus, carrying enormous wealth, stories of incredible adventures, ready to retire and enjoy the rewards of their service. But many stay, either because they have nowhere else to go, or because they cannot imagine life without the army, without Alexander, without the constant movement and purpose that have defined their adult lives.
And then, in the autumn of 324 BCE, catastrophe strikes. Personal, devastating, worse than any military defeat. Hephaestion falls ill. It begins as a fever, perhaps typhoid or some other disease common in Babylon's climate. At first it seems manageable, but the fever worsens. Hephaestion, always robust, always healthy, begins to fail. The doctors try everything: purges, bloodletting, medicines, prayers to the gods. Nothing works. Alexander stays by his bedside, desperate, helpless. This is Hephaestion, his companion since childhood, his closest friend, perhaps his lover, the person who has been with him through everything, who understands him completely, who is his Patroclus as he is Achilles. The thought of losing him is unbearable. After a week of illness, Hephaestion dies. He is perhaps 32 years old, the same age as Alexander, cut down not in glorious battle, but by invisible disease, dying in bed despite all of Alexander's power and wealth. Alexander's grief is extreme, almost unhinged. He throws himself on the body, refusing to be moved for an entire day. He orders the doctor executed for failing to save Hephaestion. He has the manes and tails of all the horses and mules cut, the ancient sign of mourning. He declares that no music shall be played in the camp until he gives permission. He sends to the oracle of Zeus Ammon in Egypt, asking that Hephaestion be granted divine honors. The oracle diplomatically responds that Hephaestion can be honored as a hero, but not worshipped as a god. Alexander plans a funeral of unprecedented magnificence. He orders a massive pyre built, perhaps 200 feet high, decorated with gold and purple, adorned with sculptures and carvings. The funeral will cost perhaps 10,000 talents, an enormous sum, enough to fund an army for years. He plans athletic games, musical competitions, military contests in Hephaestion's honor. He orders all the fires in the empire extinguished and relit only when Hephaestion's pyre is lit, as if his death marks a break in time itself. To channel his grief, Alexander launches a military campaign, a punitive expedition against the Kosaeans, a mountain tribe that has resisted Persian control. It is pointless, cruel. Alexander massacres them systematically, offering them as a sacrifice to Hephaestion's memory. It is warfare as grief, violence as mourning, and it shows how far Alexander has traveled from the idealistic young king who studied with Aristotle at MACEDON. By the spring of 323 BCE, Alexander is back in Babylon, planning his next campaigns. Despite everything, despite the mutinies, despite Hephaestion's death, despite the clear exhaustion of his army, he cannot stop. He is planning an invasion of Arabia. Beyond that, he talks of conquering the western Mediterranean, of subduing Carthage and Rome and the Italian tribes, of completing the circle, of making his empire truly global. His energy is manic, feverish. He throws himself into planning, into diplomatic receptions, into religious ceremonies.
Embassies arrive from all over the known world, from Greece, from Libya, from Italy, from Ethiopia, from distant lands seeking alliance or protection. Alexander receives them all, makes plans and treaties, extends his influence ever outward. But there are signs that something is wrong. His drinking has become heavier, more frequent, more desperate. The banquets go on for hours, wine flowing constantly, Alexander trying to drown something, grief perhaps, or exhaustion, or the realization that no amount of conquest will ever be enough, that there will always be another horizon, another campaign, another challenge. Seers and soothsayers warn him about Babylon. The omens are unfavorable. Birds die inexplicably in the city. The sacrifices reveal troubling signs. The Chaldean priests, guardians of ancient Babylonian wisdom, advise him to avoid the city, to stay away, or at least to enter from a different direction, to perform specific rituals to avert danger. Alexander dismisses their warnings. He has spent his life defying limits, refusing to accept what others say is impossible. He will not be frightened away from his own capital by superstition and bad omens. He enters Babylon in the way he chooses, stays as long as he wants, makes his plans and preparations. And yet the warnings gnaw at him. Is he being punished for Thebes, for the massacre of the Mali, for the deaths of Clytus and Telesthenes, for the thousands who died in the Gedrosian desert? Do the gods whose favor he has assumed actually approve him? Or has he gone too far, claimed too much, reached too high? But he pushes these doubts aside. There was work to do, campaigns to plan, an empire to organize. He is 32 years old, at the height of his powers, master of the world from Greece to India. The future stretches before him, full of possibilities, more conquests to achieve, more glory to win. He cannot know, no one can know, that he has perhaps 2 months left to live, that all his plans and dreams will die unfinished, that the empire he built through force of will is about to tear itself apart, that his name will be remembered not just for what he accomplished, but for what he might have accomplished if time had not run out.
It begins at a banquet, as so many critical moments in Alexander's life have begun. It is late May or early June of 323 BCE, and Alexander is attending a feast given by his friend Medius of Larissa. The wine flows freely, as always. Alexander drinks heavily, as he has been drinking more and more in recent months, trying to drown his grief over Hephaestion, trying to fill the void that his companion's death left, trying to quiet the restlessness that drives him even though he has already conquered the world. The party goes late into the night. At some point, Alexander begins to feel unwell. Perhaps it is the heat. Babylon in summer is sweltering, oppressive, unhealthy for those not accustomed to it. Perhaps it is simply too much wine. He leaves the banquet and goes to rest. The next day, he has a fever. Nothing alarming at first. Fevers are common in Babylon, especially in the hot season. Alexander continues his normal activities. He performs sacrifices, meets with his naval commanders to discuss the planned Arabian expedition, goes through the daily business of ruling his empire. But the fever persists, and he begins to feel weak. By the third day, the fever is worse. Alexander takes to his bed, but still tries to conduct business. His generals come to his bedside for consultations. He gives orders about the fleet, about troop movements, about preparations for the coming campaign. He is determined not to let illness interrupt his plans. But the fever continues to climb. On the 4th and 5th days, Alexander is clearly seriously ill. He is moved to a building near the palace's swimming bath, perhaps hoping the cooler air near the water will help, perhaps just to be in a place where he can rest more comfortably. The doctors try everything they know: purges, bloodletting, medicines made from exotic herbs. Nothing works. The fever keeps rising. By the 6th day, Alexander can no longer rise from his bed. He can barely speak, but he still tries to give orders, still makes plans for the campaign, still believes he will recover and lead his army to Arabia and beyond. His generals gather around his bed, taking instructions, hiding their growing fear that their king is dying.
The fever rages. Alexander drifts in and out of consciousness. When he is lucid, he asks about the fleet, about when they will sail, when the campaign will begin. His generals tell him soon, soon, trying to comfort him, trying to maintain hope. But among themselves, they begin to whisper that the king will not recover, that they need to prepare for what comes after. On the 8th day, rumors spread through the camp that Alexander is already dead. The soldiers, desperate for news of their king, afraid that his generals are hiding his death to buy time for their own scheming, demand to see him. They will not be kept away. They will see Alexander with their own eyes, or they will riot. So Alexander's companions make a decision. They allow the soldiers to file through his chamber, one by one, to see their king. Thousands of them come, filing past his bed in silence. Alexander is too weak to speak, but he raises his hand to each one as they pass, recognizing them, acknowledging them, saying goodbye in the only way he can. It is heartbreaking, this final parade. These men have followed Alexander from Greece to India, have fought in every climate and terrain, have made him master of the world, and now they file past, seeing him helpless, seeing their invincible king brought low by something as mundane as fever, something no courage or tactical genius can defeat. On the 10th day, the end is near. Alexander's closest companions gather around him. They need to know, the empire needs to know, who will succeed him. The question everyone has avoided asking must now be asked: to whom do you leave your kingdom? According to some sources, Alexander whispers, to the strongest. According to others, he cannot speak at all, can only gesture, and his meaning is unclear. According to still others, he says nothing, simply removes his ring, the royal seal, and gives it to Perdiccas, one of his most trusted generals, implying that Perdiccas should serve as regent. But whatever he says or does not say, it is not enough. There is no clear heir. His son with Roxana has not yet been born. She is pregnant, but will not deliver for months. He has no other legitimate children, no brother old enough to rule, no obvious successor. He leaves only his companions, his generals, men who have served him brilliantly, but who have also learned from him that power is something you seize, not something given. On June 10th or 11th, 323 BCE, in the palace at Babylon, Alexander dies. He is 32 years old. He has lived exactly twice as long as Achilles, who died at 16 in Homer's Iliad, but like Achilles, he has achieved immortal fame, has accomplished in his short life more than most achieve in a century. The immediate aftermath is chaos barely contained. Alexander's generals gather to decide what to do. Perdiccas, holding the royal seal, claims authority as regent. But for whom is he regent? Roxana's unborn child, if it is a boy? Alexander's half-brother Philip Aridaeus, who is mentally disabled and has been kept out of public life? Neither option is satisfactory, but there is no better alternative. Finally, they reach a compromise. Philip Aridaeus will be proclaimed king as Philip III, and if Roxana's child is a boy, he will be co-king. Perdiccas will serve as regent for both. The other generals are assigned satrapies, provinces to govern. Ptolemy takes Egypt, Antigonus takes Asia Minor, Seleucus will eventually take the eastern territories. Each is powerful in his own domain. Each commands armies loyal to himself rather than to any central authority. It is a temporary solution, a facade of unity that everyone knows cannot last, but it buys time for Alexander's funeral, for the immediate transition, for the appearance that the empire will continue.
Alexander's body is prepared for burial with a care and magnificence befitting a king who claimed divine descent. It is embalmed, a process that takes months, using Egyptian and Babylonian techniques. The body is placed in a gold sarcophagus filled with honey, then placed in a larger gold casket. A magnificent funeral carriage is built, a mobile temple essentially, pulled by 64 mules, covered in gold and purple, adorned with ivory and gems.
so heavy and elaborate that it takes 2 years to prepare. The original plan is to take Alexander's body to the royal tombs at Aegae in Macedonia to bury him alongside Philip and the ancient Macedonian kings. But Ptolemy, who has taken control of Egypt, intercepts the funeral procession and brings Alexander's body to Memphis, then later to Alexandria, the city Alexander founded, which will become Ptolemy's capital. There, in Alexandria, Alexander is entombed in a magnificent mausoleum. For centuries, his tomb will be a place of pilgrimage, visited by Caesar, by Augustus, by countless others who want to pay homage to the conqueror. Then, sometime in late antiquity, the tomb is lost, looted perhaps, or destroyed, or simply forgotten as Alexandria changes hands from Romans to Christians to Muslims. Despite numerous searches, no one has ever found it with certainty. Alexander's body, like so much else about him, has passed into legend. But the body is the least important part of Alexander's legacy. What matters is what he created and what he destroyed, what he set in motion and what he left unfinished. Within a year of his death, his empire begins to fracture. Roxana gives birth to a son, Alexander IV, but the child is never allowed to truly rule. The generals, the Diadochi, the successors, begin fighting among themselves almost immediately. Perdiccas is assassinated in 321 BCE. Olympias, Alexander's mother, tries to secure her grandson's throne, but is captured and executed in 316 BCE. Roxana and young Alexander IV are murdered in 310 BCE, ending Alexander's bloodline forever. The wars of the successors will last for decades, brutal conflicts as Alexander's generals carve his empire into kingdoms of their own. Ptolemy establishes a dynasty in Egypt that will last 3 centuries, ending with Cleopatra. Seleucus takes the vast eastern territories, creating an empire stretching from Syria to India. Antigonus and his descendants will eventually control Macedonia and Greece. Smaller kingdoms emerge from the chaos: Pergamum, Bactria, others. None of these successor kingdoms will ever reunite Alexander's empire. The unified world he dreamed of, Greeks and Persians together, East and West blended, fractures along the fault lines that always existed beneath his rule. His vision depended entirely on his personal authority, his charisma, his ability to hold incompatible elements together through force of will. Without him, it cannot survive. But even in fragmenting, the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerge from Alexander's empire transform the ancient world. Greek culture spreads across 3 continents, mixing with local traditions to create something new. Greek becomes the common language of educated people from Italy to India. Greek philosophy, literature, art, and science spread far beyond Greece itself. Cities founded by Alexander or modeled on his cities become centers of culture and learning. Alexandria, especially with its famous library and lighthouse, becomes one of the world's great intellectual centers. The world Alexander created, cosmopolitan, multilingual, blending cultures, will last for centuries, surviving through the Roman period, shaping early Christianity, influencing the development of Islamic civilization. When we speak of the Hellenistic world, we are speaking of Alexander's legacy, of what he set in motion even though he could not complete it. But there is another legacy, darker and more troubling. Alexander proved that one person, through genius and will and ruthless determination, can reshape the world. He showed that ancient empires that seem eternal can fall, that the map can be redrawn, that nothing is permanent or secure. He demonstrated the possibilities and the costs of ambition unrestrained by limits. How many lives did his conquests cost? We will never know precisely. Tens of thousands certainly died in battle: Persians, Indians, Greeks, Macedonians, soldiers from a dozen nations. Tens of thousands more died in massacres when cities were sacked: Thebes, Tyre, the Mali capital, others. Thousands more died on the march, in the desert, in the mountains, from disease and exhaustion.
The total may be in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps more. Was it worth it? That depends on your perspective. If you measure by empire and cultural diffusion, by the spread of Greek learning and the creation of the Hellenistic world, perhaps yes. If you measure by individual lives destroyed, cities erased, cultures disrupted, the answer is less clear. Alexander himself, at the end, seems to have been driven less by clear vision and more by compulsion, by an inability to stop, by ambition that had become addiction. The young man who studied philosophy with Aristotle, who wept at Achilles' tomb, who showed mercy to Porus, became someone who burned Persepolis, murdered Cletus, massacred the Caucaeans as a funeral offering. Power and success and endless warfare changed him, brought out capacities for cruelty that perhaps were always there, waiting. And yet, he remains fascinating, compelling, impossible to dismiss or reduce to simple judgment. He achieved something unprecedented, conquered more in 13 years than any other conqueror in ancient history, spread Greek culture across the known world, showed that the impossible could be made real through determination and genius. He inspired loyalty and love from his followers even as he drove them past endurance. He was brilliant and flawed, visionary and destructive, human and somehow more than human. Perhaps that is why more than 2,300 years after his death, we still tell his story, still wonder about him, still try to understand what drove him and what it means. He remains alive in myth and memory, the boy who conquered the world, the king who dreamed of unity and left behind division, the man who reached for godhood and found only mortality.